Hey folks, how you doing? This is Chris Michaels, and thank you for joining me for the Three Things I Learned podcast. Today is not a happy topic. Today's actually going to be a tough topic, and this whole podcast is really dedicated to talking about the hard things in life. I emphasize life because I'm still here. Today we're actually going to be talking about my story, which is the three things I learned about attempting suicide. And this is nothing easy to talk about. And it's actually probably the hardest thing for me to talk about, especially facing a bunch of strangers down here, right? I want everybody to know down here at the bottom right now is a link to the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. If you know anybody, if you yourself are dealing with depression or looking at the end of things and saying it's too much, call the number below. There's no reason why we shouldn't be supporting one another, and why you shouldn't be able to find help if you need it. But let's give you a little background. First and foremost, I'm a happy guy now. You look at me and you think I'm a happy guy. You think I was somebody I've got it together. I've got a family of 3. I've got beautiful children. I've got a wife. I've got a big collection of friends. In fact, my Facebook friends, I probably have, you may be one of the 1,200 Facebook friends that I have, or 1,500 people that I have on LinkedIn. I'm a good networker and a communicator and somebody who goes out and puts on a pretty face. But reality is I deal with depression. I deal with anxiety. I'm an introvert by nature. So even doing this podcast is a break of my natural ability and my natural comfort level. But, back when I was 4, and yeah, we're going back a long way, I was physically and sexually abused by a caretaker, a babysitter, somebody who my parents, my family had entrusted me into their care. And it was, something that haunted me for years, because I would walk through my life, having been beaten, having been hurt, having been, the things that had happened to me, really affected me day in, day out. I was not happy, and I took it out on my sister, my little sister. As an older brother, as I got older, became 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, got into school, I used to beat her. And my anger and my depression manifested itself in a way that I had severe behavioral issues. It wasn't until I was probably in 4th grade, yes, 4th grade, that I started thinking back on what had happened and why I was acting out. That I started thinking that the only reason this had happened to me was because I wasn't loved, or because I wasn't good enough for the family. And the lies that the person who abused me put into my head, that I wasn't going to amount to anything, that nobody was ever going to love me the way that she did, that there was nothing of value that I could ever provide to the world. All of those were lies. But for me, being a young child, I believed them. I committed those to memory. I committed those to heart, and my depression took over me to the point that I tried to kill myself several times. I tried taking medication. I tried hanging myself from a tree. I ended up trying to run in front of a school bus and was tackled to the ground by a safety patrol, who, thank God he was there, because I probably would have become a hood ornament on the front of a school bus. My depression and my behavior led me to be institutionalized for 31 days at the Psychiatric Institute of Washington in Washington, D.C. area, where I was separated from my family. I was separated from my friends. I was put on antidepressants. My behavior and well-being were monitored 24/7. And it was tough kind of walking through that phase of my life. Not just tough for me, but tough for my family, tough for my folks who sacrificed whatever they needed to sacrifice to make sure that I had the best care possible. My friends who I couldn't see, not that, seeing me was not seeing me was much of a sacrifice, but they were still invested in my well-being and wanting to know how I was doing. My friends at Boy Scouts and Cub Scouts at that time, and friends at church and family friends, and extended family, cousins and grandparents, etc. So it was a really tough time. During the period of therapy and hospitalization, very intensive for that time period, I came to realize a few things. One, that the lies that I'd been told by my abuser were, in fact, lies. That was something that I needed to understand, that I was loved, and that my parents were sacrificing financially or whatever they needed to, time to come down and visit me, time out of their work schedules, taking care of my sister and everything. But they sacrificed to make sure that I received the best care possible. And that only really happens out of love. Somebody only gives that kind of devotion out of love. I also realized that there was an amount of personal value, like my feeling of worthlessness, that had eroded away. That for me, I realized, wow, if somebody's going to invest the time, the money, and the effort to give me into me, I have to be worth something. So the feeling of worthlessness and hopelessness quickly faded away. It took years for me, and even today, I still deal with feelings of inadequacy, of being good enough for my friends or family, and that manifested itself in telling lies and building up lies about myself to feel good about myself, all the way up until I was in college, and that was something that came crashing down, and I had a quarter-life crisis, when all of the lies that I had told built up and crashed down around me, and I learned from that. Probably 15 or so years ago. So there's been a lot that I've lived through after having taken my own life, or attempting to take my own life. And I'll say that this podcast is really dedicated to saying that the three things that we learned, right? The three things that I learned. So the first thing that I learned is that depression is real. There's no way that we can ignore the reality that is depression. It's a mental illness. It's something that affects millions of people a year. And just because we don't talk about it doesn't mean it isn't there. In fact, why don't we talk about it? Okay. The fact of the matter is, we knew that Lance Armstrong was suffering from testicular cancer, or was a survivor. We know that Ariana Grande or Selena Gomez has lupus. We know that people live with medical conditions day in and day out, but we didn't hear about Robin Williams suffering from depression, or Kate Spade, or Anthony Bourdain. We've heard about addiction. We hear about cancer. We hear about other illnesses, but we don't talk and have an honest conversation today about how depression is a mental illness, and how people need to be able to accept it and talk about it and know that there's a support system around them. It's not alone, and it's not endemic to one person feeling this way. This is a crisis. In fact, if the Centers of Disease Control this year stated that the suicide rates are up 25%, okay, that's only indicative of the fact that we don't talk enough about depression, and that people are getting to the end of the road because it's too taboo for us to talk about. Get over it. Depression is real. People suffer from it. I have friends with PTSD who talk about openly about PTSD and living with that and educating their friends about what they're going through, so that the next time you can talk to them, you can have a real conversation to say, how are you feeling today? And understand where they're coming from. And it's not just doing something in a vacuum. So yes, depression is real, and it's ongoing. It's something you live with. You know, I talked, our first episode a couple days ago, we talked with Owen Video, who talked about cancer. And yes, he's a cancer survivor, but he's also somebody who has to go through regular checks, right? He has to go every year, has to go through another scan, because there's always a chance of something coming back. You know, it might go into remission, but there's always a chance. Depression is something you live with. Loss is something you live with. You know, it's day in and day out. I lost my friend, a very close friend of mine, you know, a couple of years ago due to suicide. And not a day goes by where I don't think about him. I live with that. He's there. He's a memory. He's a part of something that touched my life. And in the same way that I went through my depression, I still live with that day in and day out. I have the ways that I've worked through it, and I have the ways that other people can work through it, but that's something that's real, and it's a daily struggle. So depression is real. It's an ongoing mental illness. It's something everybody is susceptible to, and something that we need to make a part of our regular discussions. Also, if you're watching this right now, thanks for tuning in. We're talking about the 3 things that I learned from attempting suicide, and it's hard to swallow, but you know, given the news today with Anthony Bourdain and yesterday with katespade, we have to have an open dialogue today. The second thing that I have to say is that you're not alone. A lot of people look at depression as something that only impacts me, and nobody will understand what I'm feeling. In fact, if you talk to people who have suffered from chronic pain. I used to work for a company called Boston Scientific, and they make spinal cord implants. The people in that that go through spinal cord surgery because they're in chronic pain, they say that nobody understands chronic pain except for somebody else who's gone through or had chronic pain themselves. So talking about being in a drug fog, or talking about being having neuropathy or phantom limb pain, or all the things that they would have from having a neurological condition, nobody else would really understand that unless it was somebody else who'd had the same kind of condition. And we, as people who've lived with depression, we often tell ourselves, nobody's going to understand what I'm feeling having been abused. Nobody's going to understand what I feel having been abandoned. Nobody's going to understand how I feel because of X, which either is a root cause of my depression or a chemical imbalance or whatever it is, because we don't talk about it. Okay? Fact of the matter is you're not alone. The sheer volume of posts that I see today of people sharing the suicide prevention hotlines, people sharing the suicide prevention resource centers and all the different links, and raising money and donations, which I might do at the end of this to raise money for suicide prevention efforts. The sheer volume of all of those posts that are happening right now on Facebook should let you know that you're not alone, and there are people out there that care. The fact is, you have friends who will sit there and will listen to you. And you might have shallow friends. You might have really in-depth friends. You might have people who've experienced something similar to you. But you at least need to know that you're not alone. You're not alone. And if you don't have a friend, call me. Send me a message. I'll do whatever I can to make sure that you've got a listening ear. And I'm certain just about anybody would do the same. And if it's not somebody that you trust, if it's this total stranger, you need somebody to talk to. And there are thousands of volunteers and people around the world willing to just talk to you about any problem that you have. If it's medical and you're feeling that you're at the end of your rope, talking to doctors. You know, you trust the doctor's diagnosis, hopefully, or talk to a priest, talk to a rabbi, talk to anybody. Absolutely anybody. To go down the street, find a homeless person who's, living without a house, doesn't have food, he's begging on a corner, and I'm certain he would probably tell you, don't give up. You're not alone at all. People will understand, and people can empathize, and people can at least be an ear for you. but just know that you're not alone. The last one is, the fact is that suicide is not painless. It's not. It's despite the Dr. Kevorkian injecting yourself with drugs so you can't feel anything. There's an amount of physical pain and emotional pain depending on what's going on. And it's not only your pain, it's the pain of others. Because what happened when I went through my ordeal? Yes, there was pain because I failed. A failed suicide attempt is horrible. One, I lived with the emotional shame. Two, I lived with the physical pain of trying to choke myself by jumping out of a tree with a rope tied around my neck, and the tree branch broke. And not only did the tree branch broke, the branch fell on top of me, so I got bruised from that. I had bruises around my neck from rope injuries. And when all is said and done, I couldn't get back up into the tree. I couldn't do anything else. And I had to live with the physical pain that manifested itself thereafter. If you end up, not being successful and trying to overdose on painkillers or overdose on something else, well, then you may even have physical damage that you've done to your body that, whoa, I wised up. I didn't want to do it. And now I'm living with physical damage to my body. But look at the wake of everything behind you. We have a very close family friend who had a TBI, a traumatic brain injury, who unfortunately took his life. And he has multiple brothers and sisters, a large extended family, and then a family that to us, they were, if anything had happened to my parents, I would have been going to live with them. They were our guardians. And there was an entire network of people that their family had touched. And so there was an entire wake of individuals who mourned and were saddened and, realized how much this person meant to them that couldn't say that to him anymore and couldn't, let him know that he didn't have to be alone or be in pain alone. And regardless of how bad it got, he could have sought help, and we could have found the right neurologist or whomever to help alleviate some of that pain. His death and our friends' deaths, and you look at Katespade and Anthonybourdain, who both leave children behind, who they now have to walk through the shadow of having a parent who had lost their life or taken their own lives. The pain is not your own to bear. And if you feel like it is, look around and notice you've got family and friends and a community. And if you don't have that, if you are legitimately alone on this planet, you must be living in some glacier break off, remote in the world. Maybe I'd understand, but there are so many people on this planet who would be willing to hear your problem, understand it, and share your burden with you. Because the pain that they're going to suffer, if you're not here, only spurs another cycle of depression, only spurs another cycle of sadness and grief, only spurs more emotional pain and regret, only spurs more doubts of self-worth for those who might have been your dependents. The pain is real. So suicide's not painless. You're not alone. And depression is real. And I think those are the three biggest things those are the three biggest things I've come out of this experience knowing. And I think that all of us can at least start the dialogue. Okay, let's talk about depression as if it's a real mental illness. Let's talk about ways to find help. Let's talk about ways to help one another if we ourselves may not be suffering from depression or may not be diagnosed with depression, but we can at least look out for our brothers and our sisters and our friends and our family and anybody else that we come across. We can volunteer to be an ear. So I'm doing that today. If you've got problems out there, if you're watching this, please share it. Let them know that I'm ready to listen. Let them know that you're ready to listen. But most importantly, know that it's real. Know that the dialogue has to begin today, because we can't go another year or another day with the increase of suicides happening in this country. Thanks for tuning in. These were my 3 things I learned from attempting suicide. If you liked it, and I hope you got something from it, please share it. In the meantime, we will see you guys next time on the 3 Things I Learned podcast.